I scanned HOA official parking ticket QR code and it went straight to my neighbor's personal Venmo. I was standing in my driveway at 7 in the morning, coffee going cold in my hand, staring at a $150 fine tucked under my windshield wiper, and something about it felt wrong before I even finished reading it. Let me tell you exactly how this unraveled, because the details matter. Every single one of them. My name is Henry. I'm 36 years old, I'm a software engineer, and I have lived in the same modest, tree-lined suburban neighborhood for 4 years. It's the kind of neighborhood that takes itself extremely seriously. We have a homeowners association with a 12-page rulebook. We have a community Facebook group where people post passive-aggressive notes about grass height. We have speed bumps that were installed after a single complaint. And we have Karen. I'm going to call her Karen because, honestly, it fits so perfectly that inventing a pseudonym feels like a disservice to the story. Karen lives directly across the street from me, in a beige house with a meticulously maintained garden and a Ring doorbell that she has mentioned, unprompted, at least 7 times in the 4 years I've lived here. She is somewhere in her mid-50s, retired, and appears to have structured her entire post-career life around the monitoring and management of other people's behavior. She has called the HOA on me twice, once for a trash bin left at the curb until 4 in the afternoon on collection day, and once because my garage door was open on a Sunday morning and she felt it detracted from the aesthetic of the street. I wish I was exaggerating either of those. I am not. We have never had a real conversation. We exchanged the kind of waves that are really just acknowledgements of shared geography. I see you, you see me, let's leave it at that. She smiles at me sometimes in the way that people smile when they're keeping score. I had no idea, until yesterday morning, exactly what kind of score she'd been keeping. It was a Thursday. I'd worked late the night before on a deployment that went sideways. We had a server migration that turned a 2-hour job into a 6-hour job, and by the time I shut my laptop it was past 1 in the morning. So when my alarm went off at 6:45 I was running on bad sleep and worse coffee, and I was already 20 minutes behind my internal schedule when I grabbed my keys and walked out to the car. The ticket was tucked under the driver's side wiper blade. That precise, purposeful placement, not flapping loose, not half sliding off, but tucked, with the fold crisp and deliberate, was the first thing that registered. The second thing was how it looked. It was good. I want to give credit where it's technically due. Whoever made this put in real effort. It was printed on cardstock, not regular paper. The header had our neighborhood's actual logo, the little oak tree inside a circle, the one that's on the HOA newsletter and the community Facebook group banner. The font was the same institutional sans serif you see on real municipal documents. There was a fine line across the top that read parking violation notice in small caps, and below it, the details. Vehicle, my license plate, correctly recorded, violation, vehicle parked more than the allowable distance from the curb, estimated 2 inches in excess of HOA regulation 4.7.2, fine amount, $150 payment due, within 72 hours to avoid vehicle tow and additional administrative fees. I stood there in the early morning light reading it, and my first genuine reaction, my gut, pre-coffee, half-asleep reaction, was a flash of anxiety. That's worth acknowledging, because that's exactly what it was designed to trigger. That little jolt of oh no, did I actually do something wrong? Even for me, someone who reads documents professionally, someone whose literal job is to look at systems and find where they break, even I felt it for a second. Then I woke up. I looked at my car. I looked at the curb. My front right tire was maybe an inch and a half from the curb. I've parallel parked in this same spot approximately 800 times. I know where my car sits. And I had a feeling, not certainty yet, just a feeling, the kind that starts in the back of your skull and spreads forward, that something here was wrong. I flipped the card over. At the bottom, below the violation details and the fine amount, was a QR code. Clean, professional, crisp edges. Above it, in the same institutional font, scan to pay fine immediately to avoid towing and additional penalty. Here's the thing about being a software engineer, you don't just scan QR codes, not without looking at them first, not without understanding what they are, technically, which is just a machine-readable link, an encoded URL, a door that opens to somewhere. And before you walk through a door, you look at where it leads. I didn't open my camera app. I opened a QR code reader that displays the embedded URL before it navigates anywhere. I held it over the code. I waited the half second for it to resolve, and I read the URL that appeared on my screen. It wasn't a city portal. It wasn't an HOA management platform. It wasn't any kind of official payment system. It was a Venmo link, a personal Venmo account, with a username I didn't recognize, with a payment request preloaded for $150. I stood in my driveway and stared at my phone screen for a long moment. The coffee had gone fully cold. Biscuit, my neighbor's dog, actually, who has a gap in the fence and considers my yard a secondary residence, came trotting around the corner of the house and sat next to my feet, and I didn't even register him. A Venmo account. Somebody had printed a fake municipal ticket with a real neighborhood logo on it, directing people to pay a fake fine directly into their personal payment account. I navigated to the the Venmo profile. That's when the real bombshell dropped. The profile picture on that Venmo account was a woman in a sun hat, standing in front of a very familiar beige house, holding a glass of white wine, smiling at the camera like someone who'd just gotten away with something. It was Karen. I looked up from my phone and across the street. Her house sat quiet in the early morning, curtains drawn, Ring doorbell blinking its small red eye at the driveway. Her car was in the garage. Everything looked normal. Everything looked exactly like it always looks. Something happened in my chest that I don't have a clean word for. It wasn't rage exactly, though rage was in there. It was more like the specific, disorienting feeling of a puzzle piece snapping into place when you realize the picture it completes is much uglier than you expected. All the small things rearranged themselves, the way she'd always positioned herself as the neighborhood's self-appointed authority, the HOA complaints, the doorbell camera constantly aimed at the street, the particular brand of watchful attention she paid to everyone's comings and goings. I'd always read it as nosiness, as that specific variety of retired suburban energy that needs a project. It hadn't been nosiness. It had been reconnaissance. I went back inside. I sat down at my kitchen table, and I started doing what I do when I need to understand a system. I started pulling at threads. First, I looked up HOA Regulation 4.7.2, the regulation cited on the ticket. I have a digital copy of our HOA rulebook because I requested it 2 years ago when Karen filed her second complaint about me and I wanted to know my rights. I searched the document. Regulation 4.7.2 does not exist. There is no parking distance regulation in our HOA rulebook at all. The HOA governs lawn maintenance, exterior paint colors, holiday decoration timing, and fence height. Parking enforcement is handled by the city, not the association. The regulation was invented. The authority was invented. The entire document was a fabrication dressed up in borrowed legitimacy. Second, I went to the community Facebook group. Not to post, not yet, just to look. I scrolled back through the last week of posts, and what I found made my jaw tighten. 3 separate posts from 3 separate neighbors in the past 7 days, all variations of the same thing. Has anyone else gotten a parking ticket from the HOA? I've never had one before and I'm not sure about the process. Do you pay online? And beneath each post, a handful of comments from people who weren't sure either. Some saying they just paid it to avoid the hassle. Some saying they couldn't find information about it on the HOA website. One post was from a woman, I'll call her Mrs. Park, who I knew was in her 70s, who had lived in this neighborhood for 22 years, who had mentioned to me once at the mailbox that she was on a fixed income since her husband passed. Her post said, received a parking notice yesterday. Wasn't sure how these work but I paid the fine through the link on the notice. $150 seemed steep but I didn't want any more trouble. She had paid it. I felt something cold move through me. Not metaphorically, an actual physical sensation, like a drop in temperature, spreading from my sternum outward. Mrs. Park had paid it. How many others had? Third, and this is where things moved very fast, I looked up the Venmo account again. Public Venmo accounts show recent transactions, unless the user has set them to private. Karen had not set hers to private. I could see the most recent incoming payments listed without amounts but with timestamps and, in some cases, notes. The notes said things like parking fine, HOA ticket, violation payment. There were at least 9 of them visible, spread across the past 10 days. 9 payments, at $150 each. That's $1,350, minimum, and that's only what was publicly visible. I put my phone down on the table. I pressed my palms flat against the surface. I breathed. I want to walk you through what went through my mind in the next 10 minutes, because I think it matters that you understand the options I considered and the one I chose. Option 1, I could go knock on Karen's door. I could stand on her porch and confront her directly, hold up the ticket, tell her I knew. I thought about this for approximately 30 seconds before discarding it, because here's the thing, if I knock on her door, she knows I'm onto her. She can delete the Venmo account. She can destroy the remaining tickets. She can lawyer up and claim it was a misunderstanding. She loses maybe 1 afternoon of income and gains advance warning. And the 9 people, at minimum, who already paid her get nothing back, because there's no official record, no case, no accountability. Option 2, I could post in the community Facebook group. I could share what I'd found and warn everyone. I thought about this one longer, because there's something deeply satisfying about the idea of her sitting across the street watching her reputation detonate in real time in a group she definitely monitors. But the same problem applies, she sees it coming. Evidence disappears. And a Facebook post isn't restitution for Mrs. Park's $150. Option 3 was the one I chose, and it required making 2 phone calls. The first call was to the local police non-emergency line. I asked to speak with someone from the fraud division. I was transferred, put on hold for 4 minutes, and then connected to a detective, I'll call him Detective R, who sounded like a man who'd heard a lot of things and was professionally difficult to surprise. I walked him through everything: the ticket, the QR code, the Venmo account, the Facebook posts, the visible transaction history. I read him the URL. I sent him screenshots while we were still on the phone. He was quiet for a moment after I finished. Then he said, very carefully, "Sir, are you certain the QR code resolves to a personal payment account and not a legitimate municipal system?" "I'm a software engineer," I said. "I can send you the raw URL string, the account metadata, and a screenshot of the public transaction log. Would that be helpful?" Another pause. Then, yes, that would be very helpful. The second call was to the United States Postal Inspection Service. This one requires a small explanation. The Postal Inspection Service investigates mail fraud in any scheme that uses the appearance of official correspondence to fraudulently obtain money. Now, Karen hadn't mailed these tickets. She'd placed them on vehicles. But the fake notices used formatting and design elements that mimicked official government documents, and the combination of that with a financial extraction scheme is what lawyers call a wire fraud predicate offense. The dispatcher I spoke to took my information, asked several specific questions about the design of the document and the method of payment collection, and told me someone would follow up. Then I went to work. I sat at my desk. I opened my laptop. I had a completely normal Thursday of code reviews and stand-up meetings and Slack messages. I didn't post on Facebook. I didn't text any neighbors. I didn't glance out my window at the beige house across the street more than, I'd estimate, 15 times. This morning, Friday, April 10th, I was at my kitchen counter at 8:15 when I saw the patrol car pull up across the street. Then a second one. I watched two officers walk up Karen's driveway and ring the doorbell. I watched Karen open the door in what appeared to be a bathrobe, holding a mug, with the specific expression of someone who was certain this is a misunderstanding they can clear up in 2 minutes. I watched that expression change. She came out onto the porch. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could see her body language cycle through several distinct phases: confusion, then a sharp, almost insulted straightening of the spine, the posture of someone who was accustomed to being in the right, and then something that broke that posture entirely, something that made her shoulders cave and her free hand come up to cover her mouth. A third vehicle arrived. Plain clothes. Fraud division, I'd guess. Karen was walked to a patrol car at 8:47 in the morning, still in her bathrobe, the mug presumably left somewhere on the porch. Her Ring doorbell blinked its little red eye at all of it. I don't know if any of her neighbors filmed it. I hope Mrs. Park didn't see it, or, actually, I've revised that. I hope Mrs. Park did see it, and I hope someone knocked on her door afterward and explained that there's a process underway to recover what she lost. Because that's the part that stays with me. Not Karen in handcuffs, not the satisfaction of the system working the way it's supposed to, though I'd be lying if I said that didn't register. What stays with me is Mrs. Park's Facebook post. I paid the fine through the link on the notice. $150 seems steep, but I didn't want any more trouble. She didn't want any more trouble. She was 70-something years old, on a fixed income, and she looked at an authoritative piece of paper with an official logo and a QR code and she thought, I should just handle this and move on. And someone, her neighbor, a woman who'd lived across the same street for years, who probably knew exactly who Mrs. Park was and exactly what $150 meant to her, had counted on that, had designed the whole thing to exploit exactly that instinct. That's not a scam, that's predation. I want to be clear that I don't know what charges Karen is ultimately going to face. That's not my department. What I know is what the fraud detective told me when he called to confirm the arrest this morning, that printing fictitious penalty notices to fraudulently extract payment is a serious matter, that both the city and the postal inspector's office were involved, and that my documentation had been, and I'm quoting him directly here, exceptionally thorough. I told him I work in systems. I told him that when you work in systems, you learn that every scam has a failure point, someplace where the logic breaks, where the output doesn't match what it claims to be. You just have to look at the right layer. He seemed to find that amusing in a tired, Friday morning kind of way. My car is still in the driveway. Same spot. I checked the distance from the curb this morning out of some residual compulsion toward accuracy, approximately 1.5 inches. Well within any reasonable interpretation of any regulation that actually exists. The beige house across the street is very quiet. The Ring doorbell is still blinking. The garden is still meticulously maintained. It'll probably stay that way for a while, whoever tends to it next. So here's what I want to ask you, and I want a real answer in the comments. If you'd found that ticket, if you'd stood in your driveway half awake and read that official-looking notice, would you have scanned the code without checking it first? Would you have just paid it, the way 9 of my neighbors did, because the logo looked right and you didn't want the hassle? And if you would have, if that's an honest answer, then who's actually responsible for what Karen got away with for 10 days? The woman running the scam, or the systems we've all quietly agreed to trust without ever looking at what's underneath them? Tell me what you think.
If you have made it this far and want to see more videos like this, then kindly subscribe and turn on notifications so you may never miss another story like this.